first panel to continue this discussion. I'd like to invite the panelists to the stage, please. I will move over here and we'll have our panelists join us now, please. We have His Excellency Umar Saif from Pakistan, the Federal Minister for Science and Technology and Minister of IT at the Ministry of Information and Technology. Please come to the stage, sir. Thank you very much. We have Dr. Henry Wang Huayao, who is the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, which is really an amazing think tank. I read their stuff all the time. Thank you so much. And we have Shane Tejarati, the co-founder of Superbridge Council, the chairman of VS Partners Hong Kong, and the architect of Honeywell's global expansion. Thank you so much. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. You have microphones by your side. I'm afraid you're going to have to use them to be heard. Our panel is really about surging economies, how they develop, how they sustain themselves. But why don't we start by taking an overview. When you look at examples of surging economies around the world, can you think of 2 or 3 elements that they have in common that separate from the pack? And then are these replicable around the world, or are they particular to these economies? Perhaps you can start.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is a fantastic show. So congratulations to the organizers also. This is the first time participating in this. The emerging, or the word that you use is what?
Surging.
Surging economy.
Yes. Emerging. It's one thing to emerge. It's another thing to actually power that growth.
I think surging economies have some important elements, and I think most of them would have these common themes. One, I think they have, at least the part of the world that I come from, have a demographic advantage, which means that there are lots of people there, lots of consumers, and mostly young. So I come from a country where 65% of the population is youth, less than 35 years old. It's also the 5th largest population of the world. It's the 7th largest market for cell phones. It's also the 4th largest producer for sugarcane and 5th largest producer for cotton and the 10th largest producer for rice. So these are economies that are endowed with, one, lots of consumers, young, educated, urbanized, tech-savvy. So big market, huge opportunity to sell great products. These are economies that are based on technology and knowledge. So the country that I come from, we produce close to 1 million university graduates every year. That's larger than the entire university system in most countries. And out of those, I think 75,000 are just information technology graduates. So these are people who can produce technology, who can use technology, who are tech-savvy. Surging economies also have, I think, this drive to not just use technology and innovation, but also embrace emerging technology, so AI, blockchain. And in some cases, you can leapfrog many other countries because some of the infrastructure wasn't built when these technologies came along. So in Pakistan, we are about to auction the 5G spectrum. So just because we had this spectrum available in a spectrum range which supports 5G, we could leapfrog a lot of the world from largely 3G connectivity and patches of 4G towards 5G. And kind of truly embrace this 4th industrial revolution. So I think, these are the economies where you have large domestic consumers, young, tech-savvy. You have, they're typically naturally endowed with either their geostrategic advantage, where we are a critical component in the One Belt, One Road initiative. We could become a digital corridor of connectivity to Central Asian states. We are an agrarian economy, so we could be producing, we could be the food basket of the world or an alternative food basket of the world. And I think there's an opportunity to leapfrog a lot of other countries because of the lack of infrastructure that wasn't put in place. But now with all these exciting technologies coming along, I think there's a huge opportunity to leapfrog into a position where we are truly driven by innovation, truly driven as a knowledge economy in this fourth industrial revolution that's unfolding.
That's fascinating. So you mentioned the demographic advantage that Pakistan has. Of course, we've read a lot recently about China has lost that demographic advantage. Do you see that as a key factor, or are there other factors we should concentrate on?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David, for moderating. This is an excellent conference I've been able to attend. And Dubai is so impressive. I was amazed by the fast-growing economy here. Well, I think you raised a very good question. I would say there's 3 or 4 factors. Given that I come from China, I can see what China has done to achieve this kind of the common beneficial factor that really helps probably for other developing countries as well. The first is, I think, this human resource development. You know, China actually has built the largest education system, largest social care system, and largest medical system, even though sometimes not really that rich, but it still provides basics. So plus on top of that, China has trained already 280 million college graduates among its working population. Even though the demographic numbers decline, but the quality is still rising. Right. So from high speed to high quality, I think that's number one. You have to really build the largest human resources capacity that for the developing countries to really emerging economy to catch up. Second, I think is the infrastructure. We're having the 10th anniversary Belt and Road Initiative. I think China not only that benefit from itself, but also trying to promote that to the world. And then like a famous Chinese saying goes, if you want to be rich, you build the roads first. Yes. So I think that's problem number 2. The infrastructure connectivity is really great for all the emerging economy, probably global south as time goes on. But then thirdly, I would say it's the digital. You know, the digital is that China has the 70% of the 5G stations. 3 million plus 4 million 4G stations. So that's really impressive. Well-connected and 1 billion smartphone users. So that again is another factor. I think we're getting into the digital age. And finally, I can think about is this green technology. We are getting into green, and climate change is the biggest threats. And all the future countries has to come up with that. So the leading technology and development on clean energy, clean solar, wind, and EV cars, and all those things. So those things are really, I think, for any countries, particularly those emerging economies, that we have to grasp and really to make the difference, and then to the world to embrace the new challenges and opportunities.
Right. So that's a great overview. Shane, but maybe you can reveal to us your secret sauce at Honeywell. How did you identify your targets when you wanted to build a business, because you did it so successfully?
Yeah, thank you. I think if we look back 20 years ago, when the concept of BRICS came along, it was important for us not to be just falling romantically in love with the concept of BRICS. What was really happening was that the whole emerging economies were being driven by China at the time. If you look at for the first 15 years of BRICS, more than 70% of the net GDP growth in the world came really from China. But why was that the case? I think it was a combination of the right policies for development, for R&D, for science and education policy, but also a methodical approach to urbanization and urban development and land use. Now, we can argue some of those, but reality is when we talk about urbanization, which is one of the largest drivers of economic growth in the past, say, 30 years, China's urbanization policy was such that as people moved to urban centers, the standard of living actually rose, yes, versus people just clogging urban centers in search of new homes, and the standard of living in some places,
there.
Actually, the jobs are not there in the urban cities. So a methodic approach to development in fast-moving economies. So we focused on China first. And we said, if we don't get China right, then the rest of the world don't matter. And that was the right thing to do. For the first 10 years, essentially we focused systematically on China. And we focused on what we called East for East. We knew intuitively that the solutions and technologies that you develop in the West don't directly transpose themselves to the East, because there's high population, low arable land, dense areas, and fast-moving things at a much lower GDP per capita than the West. How could you go and implement a mature economy technology for a 50,000 GDP per capita of Germany into a fast-growing economy that is at 3,000 GDP per capita? So we started with a blank sheet of paper, and it was very difficult for a company like Honeywell. And then the rest is history. You trust that the local people know what their problems are. You give them the tools, and then they can develop those innovations. And we did that. And within a few years, the number of IPs that we registered for fast-moving economies in China far surpassed our global IP. And very soon, China became not only the second largest country after the US for us, but the single largest contributor of growth. And I always talked about it. I said jokingly that it was never BRICS. It was CREST, the big C, and then the rest. But now the rest is emerging. The rest of the world is not necessarily copying China, but taking some of those chapters, because what's happening is, instead of saying we have a first world and a third world, which was a very arbitrary distinction, we have layers of economic prosperity growing. We have the upper segment, we have the high mid segment, we have the middle segment that is emerging, still not the same as the Western mid segment. And then we have this mass mid segment, less than 10,000 GDP per capita, but still has economic power. It's coming up in India, in Germany, in Vietnam, in the rest of Southeast Asia. Africa is emerging. And where would you get innovation for mass mid segment? You certainly aren't going to get it in Germany or in the United States or in Netherlands. You're going to get it from these, from China, from India, from these economies that already are maybe 5 to 10 years ahead. So I'm still fairly bullish that, despite the fact that, let's say, global high growth regions has lost some of its engine of development, but the fundamentals are there. The people are already born. It's not like we're not looking for the future. The demographics are already there. And there's about 4 to 5 billion people that are yet not part of the participation of this grand economic engine.
But
they're coming up. And in the next 10 years, we're going to have about 1 billion people entering the mass mid segment. 200 million of it will come from China, about 400 million from India, and about the rest of it will come from the rest of the emerging economy. That is tremendous power. And I think companies that are equipped to deal with that are the companies that are going to win. Economies that are equipped to deal with that are the ones that are going to win.
Thank you. I think your idea, your original idea of East for East was so powerful. Even today, I see so many companies making the mistake of trying to simply carbon copy throughout the world things that they developed at headquarters.
Yeah. And now you see, for example, about 20 years of development in battery technology and EVs in China, where people were not even thinking about it. Now the Chinese, we did an analysis of the top 100 Chinese EVs. About 20 of them are truly world-class. And we're now beginning to see the trickles of those into Europe and into other parts of the world. And it didn't happen overnight. I think the same innovations are going to happen in areas that are the problems of these economies. What are these areas? Healthcare, agriculture, food security, new energy, climate change. I think true innovation in these areas will come from these economies.
Okay, I'd like to pick up on that point because I think it's a very important one, and I'd like to bring you into this because when you look at the news these days, it seems unrelenting bad news. Whether it's about climate change, whether it's about geopolitical breakups, whether it's about war, there's bad news everywhere. How can surging economies confront this bad news and turn it into something positive for the future and actually use the opportunities to innovate in a positive way?
Well, I certainly come from a country where there's no dearth of bad news.
Yes.
But let me pick up first on the idea of technology innovation that's very appropriate for these surging economies. And some of these opportunities are fundamentally different. So let me give you an example. So for instance, 85% of Pakistan's adult population is unbanked. This is 100 million people. They are not going to become banked by traditional financial systems. These are not going to be brick and mortar banks. They won't have the Visa and the Master credit cards. This would have to come from fundamentally different innovation in fintech that reaches out to a low-income rural farmer and includes them into the financial system. So those are the kind of innovations which I don't think you can take them and copy-paste them in a country like Pakistan. There's no dearth of opportunities. 100 million people waiting to be banked. But it won't have to be from the banking systems that we've seen developed elsewhere and flourish elsewhere. It would have to come through innovations of a different kind. And I think what I also liked is how you split up that billion of people coming into moving the world forward. And at some stage, I think about 10 years ago, I was talking to someone at Google, and they said, we are starting an incredibly new division. It's called the next billion division. And I think that's essentially what's going to move the world forward. They're going to have unique, interesting requirements. They'll require innovation in technology. They'll require a knowledge economy that you can't just take and copy-paste into countries like this. And they require enterprise, but at a scale that's not existed before. So I wanted to emphasize this, and thank you for pointing that out. And I hope that a few million of those come from a country like Pakistan also.
Yes.
And we're, of course, right next door to China and India, which is an interesting place to be. And it's an interesting...
Interesting is a very good word.
It's an interesting neighborhood. Of course, there are other very interesting neighbors also. There is Afghanistan and Iran and so on and so forth. But at the same time, while we find ourselves in the middle of all that action, it really is now onto us to make sure that we capitalize on this opportunity for enabling trade, for making sure that we become a corridor for digital connectivity, that we equip our people and educate our people to really benefit from all the opportunity in our neighborhood. There's no denying that the next billion, a large fraction of them are going to come from India and China. And it's important for Pakistan to benefit from that growth by being neighbors to these surging economies. But more to your point, I think, of course, there's conflict, and there's more and more of that. There's bad news, and there are challenges that have probably not existed, or at least my generation have not seen at this scale before. But I think these are also challenges that will get resolved as we begin to understand this highly interconnected world, a world that offers opportunities beyond geographic boundaries. And as we embrace that, and as we capitalize on that, I think some of these traditional conflicts and challenges would also begin to fade away. But of course, we live in interesting times, and we live in times that have certainly unprecedented challenges, but unprecedented growth opportunities. And I would certainly like to take a very optimistic view of this.
I mean, certainly a lot of the bad news headlines have been around China in the past several years, and particularly around ideas about decoupling or the COVID policy, whatever. My own view working with Chinese companies is that it's spurred a lot of domestic innovation. Would you agree with that? And that that's the way that China has tried to deal with the external challenges?
That's true. I think, David, you had a good observation there. Actually, you see, we've been, so-called decoupled by the U.S. on the semiconductor, on the chip side. But then recently, we see Huawei launched its new phone, which is supposed to have 5G chips there. So also we see, the U.S. will realize that it doesn't work because China used to buy, 70% of its energy from overseas. But then buying the chips is more than China buying the energies. Yeah. So that's enormous. And then we see U.S. now relax on the South Korea company to sell chips on China. So coming back to your question, I really think that we have actually, we have to really push again the economic globalization, because that's how the Bretton Woods system we have been right on for the last 7 decades, which is largely successful, led by the U.S. But then we have to now upgrade and have to enhance, improve on that. So I think this we are getting the multipolar world, and then this multilateralism is not there yet. And then we probably need, like, for example, the Belt and Road. We have to really strengthen that. And let's also, Belt and Road can be joined by B3W, EU Global Gateway, and even this G20 recent initiative about India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. So one of the strengthening point would be that like World Bank, AIB, ADB, AFDB, all those development banks will share the similar charters. They can work together. And then emerging market and Gulf countries and ASEAN and African, Latin American, the infrastructure is, I think, still the biggest revolution that we need to deepen. And of course, China is leading on that, and we need a global system to support on that. So that's where all the future growth will come from, and the technology exchange will come from. So I think now, after 7 years of growth, the next phase of global expansion will be coming from this infrastructure, connectivity, digital, green-led revolution. And then in that point, the BRICS countries, and China is leading one of the leaders on that, has a great attraction because people want to see, should we have the security globalization, military globalization, or have an economic globalization? We certainly want to choose economic globalization, which is beneficial to all the countries. So I think if China sticks on that, and all the countries will see the difference. That's why 20, 30 countries lined up to join the BRICS. Yes. So I hope that this kind of economic strong push on China and other countries, BRICS countries, will make a difference, and will support this multilateral world and multipolar world with a new multilateralism to do that.
So that's interesting. So you just raised the expanded BRICS. So you talked about BRICS as the investment rubric. Do you also feel that organizations like, or groupings like BRICS or ASEAN or Mercosur have a role in smoothing out some of the world issues? Can you look at your
Yeah, I think certainly they do, but my concern, I think, just like you raised here, is that if we really force the world into decoupling, we're going to get it. Yeah. And it's going to be really to the regret of the world. I think there is nothing to be gained from forcing ourselves into decoupling. Reality is that China in the past 30 years has done something very, very unique. It's done what the West did in 300 years of raising nearly 1 billion people out of poverty and getting them to really begin to innovate, not just to basic subsistence, to really innovate, to create new solutions for the next emerging few billion people that are not going to have the same purchasing power of the West for at least the next 50 years. Let's be real. We're not going to have Africa have the purchasing power of today's Europe even in the next 50 years. Somewhere, somehow, the standards of living of these people have to be innovated at a cost base and with the use of technology that is commensurate with that standard of living. This will come from the emerging economies, from China, from India, from Pakistan, from wherever this innovation happens. So I hope that we could have greater participation between public and private sectors to walk beyond the headlines, to walk beyond the rhetoric that really our our generation and the generation after us will pay a big price if we force us through this imaginary decoupling. I think that that was the real impetus and the real motivation for us to think about Superbridge.
Yes.
Reality is that the world was quite lopsided in the conversations about what technologies, policies, institutions do you need to develop the world. It was essentially mostly Western in the past 70 years. Now it has to be not just West versus China. It has to become a more integrated one world discussions, because our problems are no longer a problem of, say, America or Europe or the West. They're global. The pandemic just proved that point. Today, to solve, for example, things like food security, you really cannot attack it on a national level. Climate change is an obvious one, is spoken. But even the problem of supply chain today, we've seen how the disruption, we're still paying for the disruption of that. Look at the prices that have risen, which has made the supply chain almost prohibitive for many of the emerging economies. We have to completely reinvent that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. But what I despair at is that we don't seem to have any good mechanisms for global cooperation. The UN does not seem to be picking up the ball on anything, and it's so hard to get countries to cooperate on any of the key issues.
Yes, and there's the Belt and Road Conference, the 10-year anniversary in Beijing. I think it starts tomorrow, and I think there's a new phase of that is needed. So the first phase was it is what it is. It was just China going out, and a lot of it was experimental. Now I think has to become a lot more collaborative. What are these economies really need? It's not about just China lending money and owning the infrastructure, and then these countries really overspending and not being able to have a good ROI. That's why private partnership with these are key, because private partners are looking for a decent return on their investments, and these has to be also commensurate with the level of economic activity of these countries.
Right. You look like you want to
Yeah, I'd like to say that the challenge now we have is we don't have anything common to work on. I mean, we need a common, actually, objective. I mean, climate change is probably the next biggest threat of humankind, regardless of where we are. So we have to work together. So just last month, I hosted a roundtable. I invited the China climate envoy, Minister Xie, and also American Ambassador Nick Burns and EU Ambassador Toledo, and we gathered. I proposed climate 3. Let's work on the climate. And the 3 largest emitters, 3 largest economy has to work together with these global challenges. So I would think that we have to face the imminent threat, like what happened around the world this year. The climate change is not far away. It's happening right now. So the 3 largest economy has a moral responsibility to work together. I think that's probably where US, China, EU, we don't have to quarrel and argue and decouple the risk. The biggest risk is we don't work together.
Yes.
The biggest risk is we don't really jeopardize the prosperity of the mankind. And the biggest risk is we don't develop. So we have to really de-risk those risks rather than de-risk from each other. So I think we have to really make things right for our world to go ahead.
How about in the world of information technology, which is, of course, your specialty? Do you find it easy to have conversations across geographies, or does that still tend to fall into country-based discussions?
Well, in the technology world, it's an increasingly flat world now. And we're all interconnected. Information is so accessible with all the social networks. Business is all done online, remotely. No one cares whether you're a remote worker in Manhattan or in Pakistan. So it's an increasingly flat world in how technology has interconnected businesses. I do want to come back to this point of a common moral responsibility, and maybe climate change is their driving agenda. Maybe it is, and in Pakistan, just this year, earlier this year, last year, we had 1/3 of our country affected by devastating floods. And the issue of climate injustice was raised. Of course, this isn't entirely our doing, This is a price that emerging economies like Pakistan have to pay because of a lack of coherence of a common goal towards climate change globally. And this is literally the fifth largest country that has to pay the brunt for that. So of course, this is a moral responsibility for the world to come together and work on this. And this challenges food security, this challenges trade, interconnectivity, and this will inevitably lead to conflict. So my friend here is 100% correct in pointing that out. And while we had this in Pakistan, of course, the way climate change is, it doesn't discriminate.
Yes.
So it could happen in any geography, in any country, at any time. And I think it's just around the corner. So I believe, and I really like this fact, that whether these are surging economies or developing economies or developed economies, I think a common North Star has to be this looming threat of climate change, which is just around the corner. I think it could challenge a lot of things that we currently are grappling with, a lot of bad news and conflict. This could escalate. And if we are able to overcome, and there's not just, it's not just also kind of a moral duty. There is, of course, the economics of this is also very encouraging, and there is more and more investment and awareness of ESG, and people beginning to understand that more sustainable, environmentally conscious companies are the companies that do better also. So I hope that that becomes the North Star for all of us to come together and work on a common goal.
I think that's a perfect note to end on, because if we fail on solving the climate change issue, there is no future for any of us. If we succeed, there will be major winners both for companies and for nations. So I hope that we can come together and have some winners here. Thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.